History 1. I once stumbled upon an old deserted motel called the Pacific Star Inn. It's been left to decay for over a decade, I'm sure of it. I often explore abandoned places by myself, sometimes even at night. This particular motel is in a small town called Edgewood, California. During the day, it's unbearably hot, so I decided to visit the place under the cover of darkness. It was easy to get to. I just parked by the side of the road and walked right up. There wasn't any fence to climb or security to worry about. It was one of the simplest places I've explored. Around the back, there was a large, deep pool filled with graffiti. When I shone my flashlight at the motel itself, I noticed that some of the doors on the upper floor were either ajar or completely broken. It had a spooky vibe, but that was to be expected since it had been abandoned for so long. Clearly, others had explored the place before me. A part of the building looked like it had been burned at some point, with charred walls still standing. I walked around outside for a while. It was late, and the only sounds were my footsteps crunching over broken pieces of debris. Suddenly, I heard a voice. A woman's voice. My heart started racing. In situations like this, I usually assume it's someone like security or another explorer who might not be too friendly. So I quickly slipped out of sight and turned off my flashlight. After a moment of silence, I decided to turn the light back on. The small room I was in was covered in graffiti. There was a dusty old dresser and a filthy mattress on the floor. I wondered if homeless folks might use this place for shelter, but it was so far from any populated area that it seemed unlikely. I left that room and continued exploring, peeking into every ground floor opening under the walkway to the upper rooms. Each room looked pretty similar, with different graffiti and old broken furniture. Then I heard a crash from above, like something had fallen over. My heart skipped a beat. I went back outside and aimed my flashlight up at the second-floor walkway. Feeling a mix of fear and curiosity, I decided to check it out. I climbed the stairs and peeked into each room I passed. They were all similarly trashed, with old mattresses and bits of furniture scattered around. As I walked further, I heard a slow, rhythmic banging sound. Thump, pause, thump. Someone was definitely up there. I approached the room where the noise seemed to be coming from, and it suddenly stopped. My first thought was that they might have heard me. I called out, saying I was just exploring and didn't mean any harm. I turned off my flashlight and peeked into the dark room. It smelled awful, like something rotting. I could barely make out a figure near the back wall. When I turned my flashlight back on, I pointed it downward first, then slowly raised it to see better. To my horror, I saw a pair of bare feet coming towards me fast. Instinctively, I aimed the light higher and saw a woman with a bloodied forehead and some yellow stuff on her mouth, which was hanging open. It was like something out of a nightmare. I bolted out of there, hearing her scream as I ran. The screams didn't seem to get any farther away, meaning she was chasing me. I dashed down the stairs and out of the building, running all the way back to my car. Thankfully, she didn't follow me that far. I immediately called my buddy Sam, who also enjoys urban exploring. He couldn't make it that night, but I needed to tell someone what had just happened. We speculated that the banging sound might have been the woman hitting her head against the wall, which would explain her bloody forehead. When I asked if I should call the cops, Sam advised against it, since we'd be admitting to trespassing. I drove around the area, near a few stores and fast food joints, looking for a payphone to call the police anonymously. Of course, payphones are pretty much extinct these days, so it was a wasted effort. Eventually, I called the non-emergency police number and reported a disturbed woman at the motel, pretending I wasn't the one who found her. I kept it vague and hung up quickly. I didn't stick around to see if the police showed up, but whatever was wrong with her, she definitely needed help. In all my years of exploring, I'd never encountered anything like that. History 2. A few years back, I lived in a quaint little town. My family decided it was time for a change and planned to move about 4 hours away, seeking to escape the small-town drama. While my parents were out of town, scouting for new houses, I thought it would be a good idea to have some fun. So I invited my friend Jake over and called up my cousins Ben and Luke to join us for a little adventure. We were all about pushing limits and wanted to do something thrilling, So we picked a place that was a couple of hours away, an old abandoned building called Ridgeview Hospital. Ridgeview had a reputation for being haunted. It used to be a psychiatric facility where, according to rumors, the patients weren't always treated kindly. Over time, as the need for such places dwindled, it was shut down and left to decay. Nature had taken over, and it was said that the place had an eerie vibe. We decided to leave around 11 p.m., aiming to get there by around 2 a.m. The car ride was full of excitement and anticipation as we joked and imagined what we might encounter. We arrived at about 2:45 a.m., parking at the start of the dirt road leading to the hospital. For a few minutes, we sat in the car, second-guessing our decision. It was pitch dark, and we all felt a bit of unease. But being the thrill-seekers we were, we decided to go ahead. As we drove down the overgrown road, it felt endless. Tall grass brushed against the car, and branches loomed like shadows in the darkness. Finally, we reached the hospital. It was massive, with the roof mostly gone and vines crawling up the crumbling walls. In what used to be the parking lot stood an old, overgrown water fountain. The only light came from our headlights, casting an eerie glow. We turned off the car, got out, and started toward the building. The first thing I noticed were the pentagrams spray-painted all over the walls, adding to the spooky atmosphere. We made our way upstairs, which was tricky since the stairs were almost completely fallen apart. Eventually, we climbed a ladder to what was left of the roof. From there, we noticed a small light at the front of the building. It looked like a phone's flashlight, but when we called out, there was no response and the light disappeared. Ben suggested we check out another room to ensure we were safe, but I had a nagging feeling in my gut. I wandered into an adjacent room, which was filled with old mattresses and more graffiti. As I listened to the others talk, I heard a faint noise, like a pebble hitting a window. It was weird, but I shrugged it off and continued exploring. After regrouping with Jake and my cousins, we decided to check out the basement. The stairs leading down were in bad shape, making the descent difficult. We finally reached the bottom and took a breather, trying to shake off the unsettling vibes. Suddenly, we heard a voice from the back of the room. We all froze, looking at each other with wide eyes. My cousin Luke slowly walked over, shining his flashlight around. As the beam reached the far corner, it landed on a figure crouching, facing the wall. Luke started to back away, keeping the light on the person. As soon as he rejoined us, he motioned for us to leave. We hurried out, and once we were clear, Luke called out to the person, asking if they were okay. The figure turned slowly and stared at us with a blank expression. There was a tense silence, broken by the figure's sudden, blood-curdling scream. He charged at us, and we bolted, running as fast as we could. I remember the panic, the sound of him chasing us, and the darkness closing in. My cousins were ahead, their flashlight flickering in the distance. I stumbled through the woods, branches slashing at me, my body aching from the effort. Finally, we reached a clearing and found a trail. We tried to figure out the way back to the car, but we ended up lost, wandering for what felt like hours. Eventually, we made our way back to the hospital. Relief washed over us as we spotted the building, knowing we were close to the car. But then, we heard rustling from the bushes near the building. A rock suddenly flew out, hitting Jake. The man emerged from the darkness and we ran for the car. He was close behind, but we managed to unlock the doors and jump in. As we started the engine, the headlights revealed him charging at us, a glass bottle in hand. He banged on the windows, shouting incoherently. We peeled out of there, the sound of his screams fading as we sped away. The ride home was silent. We were all in shock, processing what had just happened. My hands were shaking, and I knew that night had left a mark on all of us. After that terrifying experience, none of us ever felt the urge to explore abandoned places again. It was a night we'd never forget, for all the wrong reasons. History 3. This happened in the countryside of Georgia. I was 15 at the time with my brother Seb, who was 18. Seb was big on exploring creepy places, and he somehow heard of this huge abandoned house not far from us from someone he knew. I guess he didn't want to explore it alone, so one day he brought me along with him to go check it out. Seb parked the car in a rather hidden location covered by a bunch of trees. The house property wasn't visible from here. We'd have to walk down this concrete road that clearly hadn't been touched in forever. There were giant cracks with grass and weeds growing through it just about everywhere. All the grass around the road was overgrown, almost overtaken with weeds as well. Suddenly, we noticed a woman down the road walking behind us in our direction. I asked Seb what we should do, and he said to just play it cool. If we started to run, it would look suspicious. The woman was walking with both her hands folded behind her back, as if she were going for a relaxing stroll. We kept walking at our regular pace, maybe picking it up a bit, just slightly. I turned around once more, and she was much closer now, and I could see a smile on her face. She was looking back at me. Then she said, "Lovely day today, isn't it?" My brother and I simultaneously responded, "Yeah." She kept walking behind us, getting closer and closer. Then, as she was almost right on top of us, with her hands still folded behind her back, she said, "I have to go to bed now." Seb and I looked at one another with confused looks. We both picked up the pace now without saying a word to each other. We just saw in each other's faces that it was time to speed up and get away from this woman. My brother turned around one last time and said, "Have a great day, ma'am." We stayed in the speedwalk pace for a while, and the next time we turned around, that woman was gone, completely off the road. That meant she must have taken off into the woods, which was incredibly creepy. It was absolutely a chilling start to this little field trip. We made it to the house. It was noticeably deteriorated. There were vines of ivy growing up certain parts of the walls. Some of the glass windows were shattered, meaning it had been explored before, and that's exactly how we entered the house, through one of the broken windows. We climbed in, making sure not to cut ourselves on any broken glass. Right from the start, surprisingly, there was a lot of stuff left behind, like all the furniture, albeit it looked a little worn out. All the wall decor, the little decorations on the coffee table. Even when we went into the kitchen and checked the fridge, there were food items left behind, very rotten food items. Opening that fridge was like getting smacked in the face with a smell of death. After checking the whole first floor, we went down to the basement. The basement, like the first floor, was still completely furnished, although down here it was a lot messier. There were a ton of things like loose sheets of paper and garbage spread out on the floor. The carpet was a faded blue color. There was a little bit of light that came into the room through the windows at the top of the walls. And then we heard a noise from upstairs, a distinct thump. We both just froze like statues, waiting for any kind of noise again. Within a few seconds, we chalked it up to just being a noise of an old deteriorating house. There wasn't much else to see in the basement, so we went back up to the first floor, and the only place left to check was the upstairs. At the top of the stairs, from what I remember, was the bathroom directly in front of the stairs, and then to the left was a small hallway that led to an open door, and then the hallway cut left. I don't remember what was to the right, but I'll tell you why in a second. Seb and I went left and into the first doorway. It was a bedroom, a decently sized bedroom, but it didn't seem like the master bedroom. There was a double bed in there and an antique-looking dresser. There were some old articles of clothing left behind in the dresser, nothing I wanted to touch. Seb left the room first, and then he said my name in a very concerned, scared-sounding tone. I looked up at him and he was looking down the hall. I stepped into the hall and saw what he was looking at. There was that woman from earlier, standing in front of the bed in another bedroom at the end of the short hallway. She was still smiling like before. She opened her mouth and said, "Do you want to see what's behind my back?" My brother screamed, "You!" and he pushed me to start running. We both made a beeline for the front door and sprinted to the outside. I couldn't help but look back at the house at the upstairs windows, expecting her to be at one of them, but she wasn't. I also just had to make sure she wasn't chasing after us. We kept running until we were out of sight from the house, and then we kept running some more. Even though my cardio sucked and I was out of breath, when we finally made it back to the car, I gagged, trying to throw up from exhaustion. We got in the car, and Seb drove us home. The whole ride, we couldn't stop theorizing what it was that just happened. We said it might have been some loony woman off her meds or escaped from a mental facility or something. Maybe she was living in that abandoned house. But even explaining all of that away, the big question is, what did she have behind her back? And was she holding it that whole time she was walking behind us? So many questions that will never be answered.